So it's 4 p.m. in Germany, depending on where you're coming from. Maybe it's an hour earlier or an hour later for you, but welcome to our today's webinar. And by the way, I would be also very happy to have some guests here from around the world who have maybe even bigger time differences. So maybe say a quick hello in the chat and tell us where you're sending your greetings from. That would be great. My name is Margot Molkenbohr. I work at the Institute for Applied Prevention Research at the German Prevention Congress, and I'm very happy to host today's webinar, in which we will be on the track of citizens' feelings of insecurity. As some of you may know, this is part of a CCI webinar series with the help of the CCI project, in which we already developed tools for police crime prevention together with a lot of law enforcement agencies from different countries. And one of the main focus areas in this project are feelings of insecurity. A few weeks ago, we already presented a tool which was developed by the Catalan project partners. If you missed that, you can watch the recording afterwards. It is available on the CCI website and on the YouTube channel. We can send a link in the chat. And today you will get to know another tool and a new perspective on this topic. And therefore, I have great support today, and would like to welcome our speakers and our moderation and give you a brief overview of what you can expect in the next hour. Right, so at first, Professor Dr. Jan Üblacker will open the webinar with an urban sociological perspective, and will speak about 15 minutes about policing and gentrification, and also about the responsibilities of police forces on the one hand, and the municipal public order services on the other hand, for example. He's professor for housing and neighborhood development at the University of Applied Science in Bochum here in Germany. Afterwards, Dr. Anke Schröder will give a short introduction about public spaces and fear of crime, as she is an architectural sociologist and responsible for the Center of Competence of Urban Security, and very experienced in bringing research approaches to the daily practice of the police. And then Melanie Schlüter will present Inside, a new tool developed in the CCI project, as I already mentioned. And this tool is supporting crime prevention practitioners to measure and mitigate citizens' feelings of insecurity by combining established and new methods on the one hand, and already by allowing citizens to actively participate. She currently works as a research associate at the criminological research of the State Office for Criminal Investigation of Lower Saxony, so the LKA of Lower Saxony. And last but not least, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Dagmar Heinrich, who will do the moderation today. And she's working at the Design Against Crime Solution Center at the University of Salford, and also working at on the CCI project. And we really would appreciate your active participation. So if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the chat. There is a small question mark in a speech bubble, and feel free to send your questions or comments straight away. Dagmar will look through it and discuss it at the very end with the speakers. So lastly, just a short note that this webinar will be recorded, And with that, I would like to directly hand over to Jan Üblacker, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing his perspective on this topic.
Yeah. Hi. There it is. Just a moment, I'm selecting the screen. So now you should be able to see my presentation. Yeah, thanks again. My name is Jan Üblacker, and I'm happy to present to you on the topic of local cultures of control, public order policing, and gentrification in the post-industrial city. I'm starting right off. The aim of this presentation is to give you a short, but hopefully precise introduction to theoretical ideas and some empirical findings on the relation between neighborhood change, gentrification, and public order policing. So this is meant to serve us as an analytical roadmap to navigate us through the presentation. So we're starting on the top level of a society, then we're looking at what kind of influence a city has, then we're going down to the neighborhood, and finally to the individual level, just to give us a short roadmap. So our starting point is Garland's work on the culture of control, in which he studies governmental responses to disorder in Western society, more specifically in the UK and in the USA. He observes new practices and institutions of crime control and criminal justice that are being established as a response to scandalized crime rate trends. He is specifically focusing on Western society and sheds light on expanding infrastructures of crime prevention and community safety at the local level that is based on new management styles and working practices. These working practices may take the form of preventative partnerships between state, municipal, and private actors that constitute a new crime control establishment. And this leads to shifting priorities of the police and also the public order police that is specifically important for the next few slides. These shifting priorities, so the new priorities are fear reduction, quality of life, public order, and cleanliness. This is important to bear in mind as we are now focusing on this in specific. So crime prevention panels, community policing strategies, principles of crime prevention and urban planning, municipalization of policing responsibilities change the system of social control. So Singenstein and Stoller also speak of high control societies. So what is especially important is the municipalization of policing responsibilities, because this leads us to the more local level. So Garland himself acknowledges that in the local context, police and other law enforcement agencies are confronted with different challenges in varying regional and local framework conditions, of course. So we wonder how to explain local variation. What explains the local variation of policing strategies? And when me and a colleague, Tim Lucas from University of Wuppertal, we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we came up with the concept of Lee, city habitus, that allows us to understand and explain why cities vary in their behavior towards public order issues. So according to Lee, a city habitus is a set of relatively consistent, enduring, and generative cultural predispositions to respond to current circumstances. So basically, Lee takes the idea of the habitus from Bourdieu and transfers it onto cities. And he says it might be analyzed by looking at how a city spends its budget, how it is using its land, or how it even deals with issues of public order. And we can analyze it by observing debates in local media, in city councils, or in community groups. Some empirical findings on that support this idea of that cities indeed vary. So Devereux and colleagues studied the political dynamics between federal, regional, and local actors in the Belgian Municipal Administrative Sanctions Act. And this MAS, as they call it, is an instrument to sanction antisocial behavior for the municipalities. And they found indeed that This act was interpreted differently by the cities Antwerp and Liège, the two cities they compare with each other. Another approach to city comparison is Sharp's study. He tests the so-called post-industrial policing hypothesis, which argues that the more a city's economy reflects creative class and cultural tourism, the more its police will emphasize order maintenance actions. So in his analysis of 180 US cities, he finds support for this hypothesis. But how does all this relate to the neighborhood level? Of course, this does not happen in all areas of the city at the same time or alike. So research has focused on the relation between gentrification and public order policing, since they often occur in conjunction. So before we go on, it's important to understand what gentrification actually means. So I'm not going into detail here, but what I'd like you to understand and what this table demonstrates is that gentrification is a quite complex and multidimensional process in which neighborhoods go through social change, change in the built environment, change in retail landscape, and symbolic changes. We will focus on the first two dimensions from which theoretical explanations for the demand of public order policing can be derived, which are these two: social change and changes in the built environment. So what you see here are the indicators that usually we use to measure if a neighborhood gentrifies or not. So from these 2 points of view, when asking why a neighborhood gentrifies, there are 2 competing explanations, so to say, the demand side and the supply side. And both can be related to policing, and more specifically to the demand for policing. And this is what I am going to explain to you in the next 2 slides. So demand for policing, what are theoretical explanations? As I said, there is the demand side explanation. There are 3 aspects that are important to consider when looking at the demand side explanation. So the first aspect is on the neighborhood level. As we saw on the table on the slide before, neighborhoods experiencing gentrification also experience a population turnover and a socioeconomic status dynamic, which reduces collective efficacy, especially for status lower groups. So, and this leads residents to rely on formal social control instead of informal social control, so more like community-oriented social control. So what is formal social control? That's typically the municipality, public order authorities, or the police. The second important aspect is focusing on the incoming middle class households. We know from research that these incoming middle class households have, compared to the population that is already in the neighborhood, have different perceptions of and attitudes towards disorder and deviant behavior in public. Having a more closer look at these middle class households, research comes to the conclusion that there are specific types of middle class households that move into these central neighborhoods. And there is one type that is important for our argumentation here. This is the risk-averse type. So these households have typically high social, cultural, economic capital, and they are less accepting toward deviance and disorder in their neighborhood. They use their high power to complain and engage in initiatives, and this finally raises the demand for public order policing in such a neighborhood. So the results are, of course, fear reduction, increase in subjective quality of life. So the quality of life for the newcomers, of course, increases when public order policing sets off in this neighborhood, increasing attractiveness of the neighborhood, and this in general paves the way for further gentrification of this neighborhood. So this is the demand side explanation for the demand for policing. But there's also the supply side explanation, and this comes from a totally different perspective, more from the built environment and real estate economics perspective. So according to Logan and Malich, cities can be understood as urban growth machines. And they say, as well as Smith also, landlords and real estate developers work with city governments to generate economic growth. So sites of this economic growth generation are typically large new build developments in central business districts within cities and redevelopment of neighborhoods. So seen through this perspective, disorderly behavior is framed not just as a threat to public order, but to economic development and tax revenue. So this is a quite interesting perspective, because it's obviously, in this perspective, it's also an economic threat. So public order police, in this perspective, is a mean to displace these behaviors from these sites in order to increase economic productivity of previously disinvested neighborhoods, to develop infrastructures that suit middle-class preferences in housing, residential environment, and consumption, as you may be able to see here on the pictures as well with me, that also illustrate kind of groupings targeted by these new developments. So I also brought some empirical findings on these competing explanations for the demand of policing, because up to now, it's only theoretical explanations, but what do the findings tell us? So one disclaimer maybe to this last slide. All the findings on this come from US American cities. This is quite interesting because apparently they seem to have the data to test these relations. So I am going through these 3 studies. Collins and colleagues demonstrate that tracts experiencing gentrification, so census tracts, sort of smaller neighborhoods, experiencing gentrification also experience a greater number of police citations related to homelessness compared to non-gentrifying tracts. They did this study in LA. So Lanionu finds a positive association between gentrification and street-level police stops in New York, with the most dramatic impacts taking place not in the gentrifying tracts, but in the tracts next to the gentrifying areas, which is quite an interesting finding. So it sort of spreads throughout the city. So the spatial distribution of police stops cannot be explained by a higher citizen demand, which finds so for police intervention. And since the author did not test for the supply side explanation, there is only the concluding assumption that apparently some sort of elite level decision making has to be at stake here. So Beck tests both supply and demand side explanations for demand for policing, and finds that with the influx of middle class households, the demand for policing increases, but not the number of arrests. So what he finds is that low-level arrests rather follow rising property values, which in his study support the idea of the supply side explanation. The fact that the increasing demand did not result in more arrests led this author to the conclusion that policing styles and outcomes vary as a reaction to neighborhood change. And this leads us to a whole new question for further research, and this is where I am closing. How do public order authorities, police staff perceive neighborhoods and neighborhood change, and how is this actually affecting their actions in these places? I think this is quite an interesting point to pick up and do further research. So that's it. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'm passing back to the moderation.
Yes, thanks a lot for this first part of the webinar. I've already made Anke Schröder as presenter. I think we'll directly hand over to her. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting presentation, Jan. And I will come back to Europe with my presentation, and I try to build the bridge between your theoretical aspects and our very practical tool in this next presentation before I give to my colleague Melanie Schlüter. We have your studies in mind during we preparing a tool for citizens' feelings of insecurity. We are very pleased to present our tool Insight on the trail of citizens' feelings of insecurity as a part of the European funded project Cutting Crime Impact. This is not my presentation. Just a second, sorry. Okay, the project Cutting Crime Impact started in October 2018, and it will be finished in December 2021. The European Commission in the Horizon 2020 program funds the project. We have 12 partners coming from the law enforcement agencies, institutes and research partners across Europe. The leader of the project is the Design Against Crime Solution Center with Professor Caroline Davey and Andrew Wooden from the University of Salford in UK. The aim of the project is to support LIAs, law enforcement agencies, in developing a preventive and sustainable approach to tackling high-impact everyday crime. The team developed toolkits in 4 levels: predictive policing, community policing, crime prevention through urban design and planning, and measuring and mitigating citizens' feeling of insecurity. In this area, insight was developed. The focus of the tools addresses the everyday life situation of the experts in the field of crime prevention in urban design and planning. In the Competence Center of Urban Security, we are working in an interdisciplinary team in the interface of criminology and planning and in the field of public space and feeling of insecurity. Coming to the public space, we interpret public space as a mirror of society. If the public space offers opportunity to stay, then people obviously take advantage to these opportunities. But if the public space doesn't offer any qualities of usage, no one will be there, or only those who do not want to be in public. Public space is located in the area of tension between long-term design and dynamic social changes. Places that were designed 20 years ago no longer meet the requirement of use. We saw this very clearly during Corona. The public space was exposed to a pressure of different usage. Young people listen to music on public places in a densely population neighborhood. Public space has diverse functions. It can be a creation or transfer area, green space, urban square, but also a traffic area. Not everything works everywhere for everybody. Public space has a physical and a social meaning and needs to be prepared for the future. When public space are heavily frequented or even not frequented, feelings of insecurity can arise. These feelings of insecurity can arise from situation or structural characteristics. In the situational perspective, we differentiate between the micro level, like age, gender, migration background, education, status, as well as mobility and personal resilience. The meso level is like real crime rate, segregation processes, and so on. And the macro level aspects like global development, media reporting, demographical and social changes. In the personal fear of crime, we pointed out on affective, cognitive and cognitive dimension. If places are not well maintained, or if it's not enough lightened, people may avoid using the space. Also, undefined or unfamiliar situations or groups appear threatening. In one of our last projects, we analyzed the influence of neighborhood identity and the quality of the residential environment with a perception of safety during day and night. By doing a quantitative survey was conducted of around 1,000 people in 3 cities in Lower Saxony. On the basis of individual items, we generate a factor for intensity of neighborhood from I know my neighbors by name until when it matters, I can rely on my neighbors. For the item design and quality of the residential environment, we use 7 individual items like the streets, paths and squares in my neighborhood are well designed, buildings are well maintained, or the neighborhood is clear and friendly. Even if I can't explain all the results in detail, it was the first time that we were able to quantify the dependencies. It was surprising and confirming that the feeling of insecurity correlates only low with the intensity of neighborhood, but higher with the quality of the residential environment. Based on the finding of criminological research and gender planning, we have found that citizens' perception of safety is crucial to their use of public space. The police are therefore interested in understanding and addressing the underlying causes of citizens' feeling of insecurity. During the CCI research, we started to identify the cause of the feeling of insecurity. We quickly realized that all previous approaches, such as media reports, data analysis, or public space assessment, were based on external professional perspective. Therefore, with Insight, we developed a tool that also gathers the perspective of residents and citizens. Melanie, would you like to take the presentation over?
Yes, thank you, Anke. So I will now start my part of the presentation. Oh, no, that was wrong. So we developed the tool Insight, Einblicke in subjektive Sicherheit, which means in English, insights into subjective safety, which is a practical tool for measuring subjective feelings of safety, crime opportunities, structures in public space, and cooperative collaboration. This tool addresses all those actors who feel responsible for qualities in public space, and these include actors like the police, municipal representatives, crime prevention councils, neighborhood management, housing companies, and many more. So as Anke Schröder has already pointed out, in addition to the external perspective of experts, the internal perspective of the residents is also relevant to measure subjective feelings of unsafety in public space. It is not sufficient to look at the specific area only from the perspective of experts, as this may leave a blind spot and the safety situation may not be captured entirely. Therefore, the Insight tool consists of 5 elements that capture both the external and internal perspective on subjective feelings of safety. These elements are not completely new, since some of them are already used for advisory activities by Kurbas, but some of them were rediscovered or new developed for the purpose of the Insight tool. The 5 components can be carried out step by step in a process-like manner, as you can see here, whereby the results of the 5 components complement each other. In this way, a comprehensive geo-referenced picture of the situation on site can be obtained. Insight can be used when a situation in an area has been identified that disturbs safety in public space. This can be a situation with dominant social groups in public space, or a situation where a public space is not used. Other situations are pending redevelopment or modification measures. Oh, was war das? So, sorry. So if such a situation has been identified, the first step can be to carry out an initial inventory of the neighborhood to identify qualities of daily life as well as potential safety risks and deficits. In this process, the current situation on site is recorded and mapped with the help of safety relevant criteria. In addition, the current situation should be photographed and videotaped. This should be done both during day and night, since the public space has a different effect on the residents' perception of safety in both conditions. With the help of this procedure, places and situations that potentially cause day and night specific feelings of insecurity or unsafety can be identified. Furthermore, responsibilities can be assessed and opportunities for participation can be explored. The next step, the objective safety, can be assessed with the help of a small-scale police report on crime and incivilities. This report can only be carried out by the police, but enables an offense-specific view of the selected area and help to examine the actual crime load and incivilities in the specific local area for a specific time period. So it can be analyzed which space-related offenses such as assault, threat, theft, damage to property, or incivilities have taken place in the area, how often and where. Based on this data, it can be examined which circumstances favor the modus operandi and how crime opportunity structures can be identified, and also what characterizes the location, so what concrete offenses are possible. For this analysis, it is helpful to also use the results of the neighborhood inventory. Now I would like to show you the third component of the Insight tool. This element is the non-participative observation. With this method, different usage behavior of different groups of people can be recorded to identify preferred, little used, or even avoided places and routes. This enables a detailed analysis of usage behavior in a specific socio-spatial situation and allows conclusions about the subjective feelings of safety. Here we use the Burano method as a guideline, as it can be linked with the subjective perception of safety. The method comes originally from the planning science and was first developed in Venice to investigate the usability of places through the usage behavior of the residents of the island of Burano in Italy. So the non-participative observation can be used to assess previous assumptions regarding the use behavior and possible places of fear, like if a tunnel which was previously assessed as a possible place of fear because of bad lighting situation tends to be avoided by the residents or not. So the combination of the individual elements of the tool is therefore useful to verify or reject previous assumptions and thus to get a comprehensive picture of the situation on site. The next step, or the fourth component, is the insight of the Insight tool is the interdisciplinary spatial walkthrough to assess unsafe spaces. We call it walk around your hood. And this method is carried out with so-called experts. These experts can be all actors who feel responsible for security issues in public space and who have the aim to strengthening the residents' feeling of safety. These include the police, the public order office, planning or social work, but also crime prevention councils, neighborhood management, and housing companies. An on-site walk directs the professional view of the experts with the help of a guideline to everyday users and evaluate the quality of space from a safety-relevant perspective. Possible risks and deficits, but also qualities are recorded with this method. The experts evaluate the space not only from their own professional perspective, but also from the usage perspective of certain groups of people, by taking over different everyday perspectives. This could be the elderly woman who walks around the neighborhood with her walker, the young woman who comes home from a bar in the evening, or the little boy who wants to play football in the neighborhood. The residents themselves are not involved in this method to avoid raising expectations that cannot be fulfilled. But however, Insight offers another method for the participatory involvement of the residents, which I will now present you in more detail. So the fifth element of the Insight tool is the mapping of unsafe places using the emoji mapping markers. This is a method to capture the residents' lived experience and perception of space on a previously prepared map of a selected area, like a neighborhood. This is a newly developed method in the CCI project to fill the previous mentioned by Anke Schröder, the gap, the lack of residents' participation in the process of measuring and mitigating feelings of insecurity. So the contact to the participating group of a maximum of 6 people of different age, gender, ethnic, or social affiliation takes place via local actors. So elderly people, for example, can be reached via the senior citizens work, or children and young people can be reached via the school or youth centers. Describing good or bad spatial perceptions, however, is sometimes unusual and unfamiliar for the participants. Therefore, the method uses a very pedagogical and low threshold approach by using tools that make it easier to perceive feelings about places and just describe them. On the one hand, stickers with 7 different emojis are used. You can see them on this slide. These emojis represent different emotional states and are used to depict the participants' mood regarding a public space. There are 3 positive emojis, happy or well, safe, good, and 3 negative with uncomfortable, unsafe, and anxious, and 1 neutral emoji with the meaning of I don't care, don't know. On the other hand, there is a map of a selected area which is used. Here it is important that the map is easy to read and understandable, as it is used for orientation in selected area and as a basis for sticking on the emojis. So usually it would make sense to go out and have a walkthrough in the area with the participants, but as initial walkthroughs are not always possible due to bad weather conditions or the age of the participants, for example, elderly people, the photos and video material from the neighborhood inventory is used to support the map. So photos and videos are prepared in such a way that frequented and unused routes can be selected as visual routes. And this material can also be supported with a virtual tour via Google Street View. By this, the area is virtually explored and thus becomes present for the participants during the session. So after that, the participants are asked to describe the used and avoided routes and to map their feelings regarding the places on the map using the emoji markers. The reasons they give are recorded on the left and right side of the map and discussed at the end of the session. Through the direct participation of the residents, the results of this method shows their individual view of places and routes that they are avoided or used by them due to their feelings of unsafety. So since this is a new method, we conducted 2 pretests regarding the readability of the map, the handling of the emojis, the understanding of the photo and video material, as well as usability in general. Participants were elderly people over 80 and young women in their early 20s. So the test showed that the participants quickly developed a good understanding of the map, and furthermore, it has shown that talking about a situation with the help of pictures and video material, as well as the virtual tour via Google Street View, was well accepted and the discussion was quickly started. However, the method showed clear differences in the perception of the selected area between day and night, which is why both conditions should always be considered to get a comprehensive picture. The emojis were also well received by the participants. They were easy to understand and could clearly be distinguished. Only the size of the emoji stickers and the way they are peeled off and stuck on the map can cause difficulties, for example, for elderly people, but this can be avoided when the moderator gives support by this. So at the end of the 5 steps, and this brings me to the end of our presentation, the results and findings are summarized. So this creates a holistic picture of the situation on site, and those responsible can then develop possible solutions or strategies to strengthen the subjective safety of the residents or the safety situation on site. As you can see, the 5 elements of the Insight tool in their entirety give a clear georeferenced picture of the security situation on site and can be combined and used in a complementary way. However, this is not always possible due to resources or the situation. So therefore, the Insight tool is a kind of a toolbox that can be used in a request, resource, and situation-specific way to assess a resident's subjective feeling of safety from both the external and internal perspective. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Melanie and Anke. Thank you for presenting your toolkit Insight. And thank you to Jan, of course, as well, for your socioeconomic perspectives on the demand for public order policing, and how policing priorities have shifted through preventative partnerships with municipal and private stakeholders to focus more on reducing fear of crime and increasing quality of life. Jan, I think your research and presentation actually perfectly frame the need for these kinds of practical tools for law enforcement agencies to measure and in turn mitigate citizens' feelings of insecurity or safety. So what I found interesting about your presentation, Jan, is a lot of the examples were, of course, American cities. Are there any empirical findings for German or other European cities?
Thanks, Dagmar, for the question. There are some more ethnographic studies for a single German study. So this is something I skipped. There are a lot of single case studies that investigate in some neighborhoods and shed a more detailed light on the interaction of supply and demand side. And there are indeed some results for Düsseldorf, Leipzig, and Munich from the Safety in Train Station Areas project from the colleague I mentioned, Tim Lucas, that's relatable to this subject, and also from a colleague, Jenny Künkel. She did research on the main station district in Frankfurt and investigated policing strategies there. These are some results I know. Probably there are more.
And the results are similar to what they saw in the US, supporting the theory of the supply and demand for public order policing.
The problem is a bit with the data. So they have a lot better data to investigate in these issues. For example, New York, and I think LA as well, has this 311 hotline where people can call when they have public order issues or problems. So they can use the telephone calls to map them all over the city and see how the tract changed and look how did the number of calls raise or falls, and then they correlate it. And this is something I'm not sure if we have the possibility in Germany too, so we more rely on ethnographic or more qualitative field studies. And as far as I'm aware, it really depends on the place. It's it's like a typical answer probably from an urban researcher, but so what we found when we were looking in, for example, at Düsseldorf, that the public order police there has a much more service-oriented attitude. So, well, maybe that's enough. I'm not sure. Should I go more into detail on that?
No, absolutely. No, it's just interesting to see the difference, of course, between the US and I guess Germany in this case, on the way that I suppose the municipalities or the police deal with these public order issues, and also how research is conducted in that field clearly quite differently. So just to go to Anke and Melanie, just about your toolkit insights. Thank you for that presentation. And I just wanted to say that what I personally really admire about your tool is this combination of these tried and tested methods, repurposed methods, and then this newly developed method to get a very thorough data analysis from both experts and citizens on people's feelings of insecurity. So I can imagine while developing these kind of tools, you would have had quite a few issues with regards to COVID, obviously demonstrating your tool, talking to people, you mentioned elderly or older adults. How did you work around those issues?
During COVID, you mean?
Yes, basically,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, it was a little problem because we wanted to work in a in our area of study in Saalkamp in Hanover, and then it wasn't possible for us to go to the place where the elderly people live and to get directly in contact. And then we started to talk with people around us to try if it's possible for people who are not very familiar with the area to understand and to use the tool. But with the emojis, it was quite good because it's easy to understand, you know. If you start to talk about, even with the young women, if you start to talk about where do you use normally your way to the train station, and why didn't you use a direct way? Why are you going, I don't know, right around the corner? And then they start to talk to each other, to tell each other what is the problem in the area. And then you just have to say, use one emoji. What is your feeling if you go there? Or are you afraid? Or is it too dark? What do you think? And then you don't have to do anything. They just start to talk to each other to use these emojis. It was a quite good experience, and hopefully we can start to make our research directly on place, maybe next month or the month after it. But we presented it to our colleagues from the local police, and they are very happy to have something in their hands to work directly with the residents, you know, because as a police, you cannot go on the street to ask, how do you feel? Yeah, are you safe here? Or how do you feel? Or where do you feel unsafe? Then they always think you can change it immediately. And with this, yeah.
So do you, as obviously the LK in Lower Saxony, think that other police forces in other federal states in Germany would be interested in the Insight tool? Or have you already had any, you know, response from other police forces?
Yes, you know, we work together in the Commission of Prevention, of the Police Prevention. Yeah, in this commission, and we have the head for crime prevention in urban design and planning. And even in this meetings, they ask us for our new research results, and then we try to transport it into other countries inside Germany. Yes.
Fantastic. So just to go to oh yes,
I
Melanie,
just
sorry.
wanted to add something regarding questions of the problematic during COVID. So we had problems testing the emoji mapping marker method, but we also tested the non-participative observation method, and this was quite good because we could do it even though it was COVID situation, because we did this observation during different days at different times in the Saalkamp in Hanover, and only observed the use behavior. So we didn't have to talk or speak to residents. So it was easy to get by this way the residents' feeling of insecurity by a indirect way. So we didn't ask them directly, but we during the observation we could assess this indirectly. So
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to ask a question about kind of crime prevention in general. I know that in both your presentations you've talked about collaborative work, this interdisciplinary approach, and how crime prevention, you know, requires cooperation between different stakeholders, municipality, private, the police. So what is the role of the police in Lower Saxony in crime prevention?
Should I?
yes, please.
Yes, okay. Okay, we as the State Office for Criminal Investigation in Lower Saxony, we have the political mandate and the political order inside our, we call it Polizeidienstverordnung, it's called PDV 100, and it's written there that we have to avert danger, and we are responsible for crime prevention. Our part in the Department of Criminological Research is to bring theory into practice and to empower the local police in complex system of crime prevention in urban design and planning. And we are involved in networks and cooperation to bring the perspective of the police and of reducing crime into the network activities. Therefore, we are one partner in, for example, in the Security Partnership for Urban Development in Lower Saxony. And there we try to find the balance between diverse demands, safety and security as a part of quality of life. And this is our role, to see us as a partner in a complex and interdisciplinary team.
Great, thank you, Anke. I just wanted to go back to Jan, if possible, just with a question about obviously you've spoken about gentrification of neighbourhoods, but as we were just talking, we're talking about all the various stakeholders in these neighbourhoods. So obviously there's, your presentation spoke mainly about the citizens themselves and the police, but obviously we can talk about social services. We can also talk about businesses in the area. So, what kind of role does the change of the retail landscape play in gentrifying neighbourhoods with regards to the demand for policing?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, the retail landscape plays a bigger role than we might think, because with the businesses changing and addressing the incoming middle class, there are a lot of business owners that also raise complaints about the direct environment around their businesses, because they also, so I don't know, homeless people or drug abuse or like drug trading in the direct environment, from their perspective, reduces the attractiveness of their businesses and maybe steers away customers. So we found in some studies also that the local business people play a huge role in the increase of the demand. So in some parts, it's not so much the residents themselves, especially not the residents with a longer length of residence or higher length of residence, because they somehow got used to everything that happens on the street. It's kind of the code of the street. You might know this concept from Anderson. So they know how to handle all this, but the newcomers don't. And also the retailers, they probably have an interest to raise revenues and have a demand for police or public order authorities in this area.
So in turn, how does the police respond to these, to gentrification, to these changes in neighbourhoods?
Yeah, well, that's quite different, because it depends somehow on the city level and what self-understanding or picture of itself the public order authorities have. So research sometimes speaks of strategies of expulsion and displacement. So indeed, you can find strategies where public order authorities try to displace disorderly behaviors, but usually they're not solved. They're just displaced to another area. So they spread out in the city center or to some adjacent neighborhoods. At the same time, there are strategies where police more or less acts like social workers, tries to support or like have a more understanding approach maybe, but it needs a closer look in the specific case to understand that more precisely. And I think it is linked to the overall understanding, the so-called this is what I was talking when I was talking about city habitus. I think that plays a huge role in the definition and actions these public order authorities take on the streets. So I think this would be a fruitful field for further research to investigate in, I don't know, council debates on what actually are the politically determined aims of such public order authorities and who exerts influence on the formulation of these aims.
And perhaps also the skill sets that these officers, these citizen-facing officers, that they might require. Obviously, their role, like you say, has changed in these complex social situations, gentrification, and the fact that they would be working more with the public. So perhaps they need skills such as the ability to actively listen and work effectively with others. So we've got a question from one of our attendees here, and I believe this is probably more for Melanie with regards to the walk around your hood, but they're asking if you happen to spot a relevant correlation between the feelings of insecurity and the visibility of police forces patrolling neighbourhoods.
So this is a good question, because I think this is a really it's a topic which is highly relevant to research. So we know that from research that there is a point where the feeling of safety or security switches from this to unsafety, which means that more police presence on streets doesn't mean that people feel safer. And in regard to the walk around your hood method, I think Anke can add something, probably. Anke, you are muted.
Okay, now it's a question of situational prevention. You can't say in one situation it's the same like the other situation. As you imagine, after the Breitscheidplatz in Berlin, the terror attack, there were a lot of unsafety feeling, and then they started to bring a lot of police and a lot of street barriers in this area. And after a while, they started to make interviews with people which are using the Breitscheidplatz after the attack, and it was quite different. It was very interesting because they said it depends on the uniforms of the police officers and if they were weapons or not. And it was also a differentiation between people coming from Germany. They feel very fast unsafe, and people which come from other countries. They said it's not the feeling of insecurity started much later. I don't know if they know the picture of police officer with weapons in the street. And with the method of walk around your hood, we are not seen as police officers. We are in civil, and we go there with different people from the community administration and from social workers, and sometimes the management of the area of the neighborhood is going with us. We make it very interdisciplinary, and I'm very sure this is the only way we can manage the problem of feeling of insecurity or of crime prevention, urban design and planning, because it's very interdisciplinary. And I know that we can't change the situation to bring more police on the street or to make it with video surveillance or things like that. We had to get in contact, we had to talk about situation, and we have to recognize the practical usage of this public space, because elderly people use it quite different than young people. And if we just have this police perspective, I'm sure we will never solve the problem.
No, absolutely. So sometimes it is more about what people do rather than what they say necessarily, because that can be difficult to verbalize, can't it?
Yeah, it can be different today and tomorrow, by day and by night, and how I feel by bike, or if I go by feet, or if I talk to my bigger son, he's next to me and I feel very strong, or if I go there with my mother and I have to help her, or if I don't feel very good. So yes, I think it is quite complicated, but we are on a good way.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
So this is my part, I guess.
I think so. You've joined us, Margot, which is always the sign that we're at the end of the webinar.
Yeah, so true, so true. So yeah, time is over, unfortunately, but I really want to thank you, the three speakers today, and of course, thank you to Dagmar for the moderation, and thanks to the attendees for saying hi, for joining us, for your comments and questions. And with that, I would like to say goodbye and we take a little summer break. In August, we will not be offering a webinar in this CCI webinar series. We will continue in September with 2 webinars on a new topic on predictive policing, and this will be with our partners from the Netherlands and from Germany. But in the meantime, there will be a German-speaking webinar with the Insecurity project. This is about the view of children and young people on urban safety, and it will take place on August 11th from 9 to 11 a.m. CET, and you can already register for it if you are interested in this perspective. And we will send around further information on this, as well as the recording of this webinar and the presentation slides in a follow-up mailing in the next days. And I think that's it for today. Have a nice evening, and yeah, hope that I can welcome you in the next webinar in August or in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.